Ever feel like you're speaking a totally different language than someone even when you're talking about the same thing?
Yeah, that disconnect happens all the time, doesn't it?
Right. And that's what today's deep dive is all about, actually.
Okay, intrigued. Tell me more.
So we're diving into this conversation between Carlos and Casey, but it gets really interesting when they start talking about how we think and how we each perceive the truth.
Okay, so how do we get from MBTI to like universal truth?
Well, they started debating whether intuition is about like looking inward
Mm,
and then sensing being about observing the external world.
okay.
But then there was like, wait, introversion versus extroversion? That's
Yeah.
about how you deal with other people.
Right.
So it can't be that simple.
That's where Jungian cognitive functions come in.
Okay, hit me with it.
Think of sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling. Not as like categories, but as different ways of engaging with information. It's a framework, not a box.
A framework. Okay, so it's like that accountant analogy that Carlos uses.
Hmm.
An accountant who relies on the data, on the numbers. That's sensing.
Right.
But then you've got the entrepreneur who's operating on pure gut feeling. Even if the numbers aren't quite there yet, that's intuition.
Exactly. So are you a gut feeling person or a show me the data person?
We need both kinds of thinkers in the world, don't we?
Absolutely. Imagine a world of all accountants or all entrepreneurs wouldn't work very well, would it? We need that diversity in thinking styles.
For sure. But it does make you wonder how many arguments happen because people are stuck in those different styles. Like one person is all about logic, the other is all about emotions. Total clash.
That is a great point, and that's where Carlos's model of empathetic versus fluent thinking comes in. Fluent thinking, think of that as sequential processing, like a logical chain of steps.
Okay.
You're looking for cause and effect, like a computer working through lines of code.
Makes sense.
Now, empathetic thinking, that takes no holistic approach. It's less about the linear logic and more about understanding the nuances, the context.
So even if both approaches are looking at the same information, they could reach completely different conclusions.
Exactly. And neither is necessarily wrong, they're just different.
So how can someone figure out if they're more of a fluent or empathetic thinker? What are the signs?
Well, how do you approach a problem? Do you gather as much data as possible, break it down into smaller parts? That might be fluent thinking.
Okay.
Or are you drawn to the bigger picture? The emotional side, the interconnectedness, that's more empathetic.
This reminds me of that time I tried to.
Oh, tell me what happened.
This really reminds me of that time I tried to assemble furniture based solely on the instruction manual. Totally a fluent thinker move. I ignored all those subtle visual cues and ended up with a wonky bookshelf. Sometimes you need that empathetic perspective to see the whole picture, right?
Precisely. And it's not just about assembling furniture. Think about a time when you made a decision based solely on data or logic, only to realize later that you overlooked some crucial emotional or social factors. We've all been there. This is at the heart of what Carlos was getting at with his concerns about overly reductionist thinking, particularly in fields like AI.
So he's worried that if we focus too much on what's easily quantifiable, we miss the bigger picture. It's like trying to understand a whole ecosystem just by studying individual ants.
Exactly. If we only value what can be measured, what can be broken down into neat little algorithms, we risk overlooking the emergent properties of complex systems. Things like creativity, consciousness, even love. These are phenomena that can't be understood simply by dissecting their individual components.
It's like trying to understand a work of art by analyzing the chemical composition of its paints. You're missing the emotion, the meaning, the whole point.
Precisely. And that brings us to a fascinating point that Casey made in their conversation. She compared the search for truth to those optical illusions you see on water.
Yes, that was such a powerful metaphor. It really highlights how easily our perception can be tricked, even when we think we're seeing things clearly.
Exactly. Think about it. The position of a distant object on water can seem to shift depending on your vantage point. In the same way, our understanding of truth can be influenced by our personal biases, our past experiences, our cultural background, and yes, even our thinking style.
So are you saying that objective truth doesn't exist? That it's all relative?
Not necessarily, but it does challenge us to be more aware of our own potential for optical illusions. We all have blind spots, those areas where our usual ways of thinking might lead us astray.
So how can we avoid mistaking our own perspective, our own version of the truth, for the one and only truth? especially in today's world where everyone has a platform and an opinion?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this is where understanding different thinking styles becomes so crucial. By recognizing that we each have a unique lens through which we view the world, we can start to have more productive and empathetic conversations, even when we disagree.
It's like that saying, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the precipitate. We need to recognize these different perspectives to even begin to find solutions. Okay, so we've been talking about these different ways of thinking in a pretty abstract sense, but how does this actually play out in the real world? Which takes us back to Casey's point about truth being like an optical illusion. How do we reconcile this desire for answers, for clarity, with the understanding that our perspectives are always limited? That maybe there isn't always one right answer?
It's a profound question, and to be honest, I don't think there's an easy answer, but
I do think Casey offered us a really valuable insight when she said, we're here to have experiences. It's such a simple statement, but it's so profound. If we can shift from always needing to be right, from clinging to our own versions of truth, and just embrace this idea that learning and growth come from, experiencing the world in all its complexity, it just opens up a whole new way of engaging with each other, right?
it really does. It's about approaching conversations with curiosity instead of as a debate that has to be won, acknowledging that everyone has something to teach us.
Exactly. And it's not like abandoning critical thinking or believing everything you hear. It's more about being open to different perspectives, right? To the possibility that maybe, just maybe, you don't have all the answers.
It's a journey of always learning and refining what we thought we knew, which ties in beautifully with the idea of truth being an optical illusion. Our understanding of it is always evolving.
Totally. It's like that Rumi quote, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there.
Wow, that's a good one. I really think that's where true growth happens, in that open space, the unknown. And that takes us back to those different thinking styles, right? What if, instead of being obstacles, they're actually valuable assets in our, collective search for understanding?
Imagine surrounding yourself with people who think differently than you. Challenging. Absolutely. But wouldn't that be more illuminating than just talking to people who agree with everything you say?
Without a doubt. And it's not just about, intellectual growth. It's about building empathy and compassion. When you understand how other people see the world, you can actually start to bridge those divides.
It's like that saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. A good reminder that we need each other, right?
Yeah.
Even maybe especially when we disagree.
Perfectly said. It's a continuous journey of discovery, that's for sure.
And on that note, we'll leave you to continue the deep dive on your own. Thanks for listening.